Today's video is sponsored by Ridge for their compact, durable wallets. They've got a special holiday sale from now until December 22nd. You can save up to 40% on your purchase. You can check them out using my link in the description below, and stay tuned for later in the video to learn more. Diablo 4 recently held its closed endgame beta. This lasted about a month, running from mid-October to November 18th. In that time, players got to test out all of the main endgame systems and features that Blizzard plans to launch the game with. Now, since that test ended a couple of weeks ago, we've been seeing lots of feedback online, with testers sharing their thoughts on what they played. And thus far, as you might expect, it seems to be a bit of a mixed bag. So you've got people saying that they enjoyed their time. This one quote says, "I played every day of the beta and hit level 98. I killed the level 100 boss and played every facet of the game, and although the end game needs some work, I loved playing it. I think D4 is a huge upgrade over anything Diablo 3. Or this other one, which said, "It was a blast, real fun, I really enjoyed it. After being a huge fan of Diablo 1, 2, and 3, compared to those games, it's a much bigger open world. Skill trees allow more differentiation, more interesting quests, special areas for PvP and world bosses. It felt fresh." Now, on the other hand, were players who had some fairly harsh criticism. For now, the end game is lackluster and gets boring very fast. I was in the beta and stopped playing it 20 days before the end because it felt empty, mind-numbing, and uninteresting. And then there's this one. I played it for like 4 hours before I was bored and moved on. Dungeons are boring, combat feels slow and a slog. You fight the same 2 monster types in a given region and that's it. Open world events are repetitive. Let's just say if it gets the April release, it's going to be a really rough launch. They need at least another year. Couple other quick ones to drive the point home here. Won't be buying it if this is what the end game will be like. Nothing feels engaging after 2 weeks of playing. Or boring. I played the beta for a week and I just found myself going back to D2R. D4 felt like playing Diablo Immortal. Probably one of the most offensive things you could levy against a game. And there are quite a few more quotes that I could pull, but I think you get the picture. And this general sentiment is the one that I've seen most often in any threads discussing Diablo 4's endgame beta, that it was lacking, it got repetitive, and many players didn't last very long before feeling bored. Now, we should, of course, acknowledge that there is a bit of a selection bias here, almost certainly. As we are pulling from comments on Reddit threads and online forums, it often seems to be the case that yes, the people who are the most unsatisfied with something are more likely to voice that and post online about it compared to people who are happy. I'm sure there are a lot of people who are just happy, played the D4 beta, and aren't talking about it. They're just waiting until they get to play it again. They're certainly most likely a lot of those people. I do want to add, though, that even a lot of the commenters who were generally positive about their experience, who said that they did enjoy the beta, even many of them said that the end game still needed work. There were things to be improved. It's not perfect, etc., etc. And I think that speaks volumes. People who have a generally positive mindset of their time with it are still saying, yeah, there's things that need to be better. Let us take these criticisms here at face value and just talk a bit about the current state of Diablo 4's endgame. So what is Diablo 4's endgame? Well, as of now, we know it will consist of the following activities. There are nightmare dungeons, which are essentially hard mode versions of the dungeons you come across while leveling up. There are hell tides, which are zone-wide events that buff enemies in an area. Whispers of the Dead are like the quest system, sort of like bounties. They rotate and you get rewards. And then there's the Fields of Hatred, which is the name for the open PvP zones where you can fight other players but also NPCs to farm this specific resource. So how does engaging with this content look from a player's perspective? Like, what should you expect to be doing on a day-to-day basis in Diablo 4? Well, I found this really great recap that looks to basically consolidate the experience of many beta testers in terms of what the gameplay loop was like and what they were doing. So it opened up by saying, we will be bouncing around the 4 to 5 different activities: the Nightmare Dungeon, Helltide farming, killing world bosses, doing favors for the Tree of Whispers, and then farming red dust in the PvP zones. Each of these activities gives similar but different rewards that tie into each other, meaning you might focus on 1 or 2 of them, but you will be wanting to touch on all of them throughout different points of progression, basically giving us different avenues to feed into the endgame power progression, upgrading of gear, collecting our resources and currencies. It then goes into some detail about what each endgame activity is like, what you will be doing and why you will want to do it. Like, what is the motivation behind it? What is the reward? So first, they touched on Nightmare Dungeons, which they called a combination of D3's Greater Rifts and Path of Exile's maps. Like Greater Rifts, they go up to some high difficulty levels, eventually boosting monster level beyond the max player level. And also like maps, they will roll with positive and negative affixes that affect the difficulty and the rewards. They say that they are average level for gear drops, but completing Nightmare Dungeons will grant you this glyph experience that levels up the glyphs in your Paragon board. And as a reminder, there's somewhere like around 100 dungeons in the game, and then these Nightmare Dungeons that we get keys to improve the difficulty and run through. And again, primarily that's going to be to help progress the Paragon board. And then there are the Hell Tides. These are sort of like terror zones in Diablo 2 Resurrected. Much like the terror zones, an area of the map will be caught up in a Hell Tide for an hour, and then afterward there will be no Hell Tide for an hour, and then another area will get caught up in a Hell Tide, so on and so on. And so the Hell Tides will overhaul the zone, they will increase the difficulty, and it is said to be a good source of high-level loot drops, as well as crafting materials and gold. And then we've got the world bosses. These are said to have a very high, unique, and legendary drop rate, and also drop materials needed for socketing of your items. So it looks like this will be very important in the end game when you have a lot of gear that you need to put sockets into, but will become less important when you no longer need those sockets, so when you're not replacing your gear as frequently. And then we've got the Tree of Whispers. Again, this is sort of like a bounty system. There will be 2 or 3 dozen of these spread across the world map, and then completing them will give you these favor points. And then once you've accumulated 10 favor points, you go to the Tree of Whispers and choose one of 3 randomly generated loot sources. And then lastly is the open world PvP, the so-called Fields of Hatred. Here you are farming for this resource known as red dust, and this dust can be traded for powerful upgrades. Apparently this is one of the best ways of acquiring high-level powerful items in the beta, but that is going to depend on the activity and the difficulty level. If you're going into these PvP zones and completely getting crushed, it's not going to be a good use of your time. But if you can get in there and farm some red dust and get out successfully, whether that's by farming the NPCs for the dust and turning it in, or farming other players, if you can do this in an efficient manner, then it is going to be a good thing to farm. Obviously though, there is the incentive of just going in for the sake of PvP because you enjoy PvP. But when it comes to efficiency, it seems like the Field of Hatreds, unsurprisingly, is going to be a bit more of a gamble if you're just trying to maximize your farming of high-level resources, gear, or whatever. So those are the primary activities that you will be engaging with after you complete the campaign and you're working towards that long-term progression, gearing up your character, getting resources and currencies, progressing your Paragon board. Those 5 activities are what you will be doing and why you'll be doing each of them. Now, going over this list and like just taking a look at it kind of put out in a bullet point fashion, it really got me thinking how this compares to other similar games. I think one of the most obvious and most brought up examples is Lost Ark. The main reason, in my opinion, being that, hey, it's a top-down ARPG that mixes in these MMO elements. Now, Lost Ark appears to go a little bit harder in that direction with more traditional MMO features, more large-scale features, but nevertheless, the comparison makes a lot of sense, especially considering Lost Ark is one of the most recently released games. Obviously, you can make comparisons to other ARPGs like Path of Exile, which also has some MMO-esque, some shared world elements, but Lost Ark, in my opinion, is the better comparison, mainly because it is the most recent, so it feels like the most fresh, the most up-to-date, and you know, we're still waiting on Path of Exile too. Yeah, let's take a look at what Lost Ark has for endgame content. So for starters, we've got Chaos Dungeons. These are sort of like mini versions of Rifts in Diablo, but very, very condensed. You just smash through these large groups of enemies, a couple boxes in the mix, and you try to do it in a relatively quick fashion. Then there are Guardian Raids, which are sort of like Monster Hunter style boss fights where you and a group of players chase down a boss and go through multiple stages, chasing them down as they run away. There is the Cube, which is kind of like a condensed survival mode version of both Chaos Dungeons and Guardian Raids. Then there are Trial Paths, which are like these boss holdouts. It's kind of a horde mode. You're, instead of facing off waves of enemies, you're fending off bosses that spawn in. There's the Tower, which is this solo challenge that has you climbing floors of ever-increasing difficulty. It's a fun little PvE solo activity. There are Abyssal Dungeons, which are just hard mode version of the leveling dungeons. This would be analogous to the Nightmare Dungeons in D4. They've also got 16-player raids. These are just super tough group content that requires very coordinated coordinated effort. It's one of those things where if one person screws up in some of these scenarios, it could just destroy the run for everybody. And then they also have a smattering of world events like field bosses found out in the open world, of which this game has 20. There are chaos gates, which are portals that open up in the world and will take you to an instance where you fight through some mobs and bosses. There are ghost ships found out in the ocean. You sail to them, you hop aboard, you fight some trash and some bosses. There are the adventure islands, which are these limited time islands that only appear at certain times of day throughout the week. PvP content has a few different sides to it. There is arenas between team deathmatch, free-for-all, and last team standing mode. There are also zones dedicated to open PvP, as well as large-scale guild battles. And then there's a host of other stuff to do to fill your time, various activities. You've got the Una's tasks, which are dailies and weekly quests that have you going through different parts of the world for various rewards. There's the Stronghold or the Island Estate, which is instance player housing, also plays into the game's crafting system. There are crew missions and even mini games. There's the whole sailing system. Lost Ark features a massive ocean. You can sail around to different continents in the game, but also the ocean is full of islands, which are just like these tiny little zones that you can visit, do quests, fight things, get rewards. There is the adventure book, which is a zone completion. So every zone will have like world bosses, collectibles, viewpoints, dungeons, and monsters. And as you clear through and progress them, you collect rewards with a big reward for doing it all. And then there are a ton of different collectibles, island token, giant hearts, Makoko seeds, and more. Lots of in-game items to find and collect. And all of this stuff, that massive list that I just went through, this all falls under the category of end game content, in that you're getting rewards that will give you some combination of gear, currency, or resources that are used to work towards the late game progression. And when you put the two side by side, the disparity gets a lot more clear. Just to recap, Diablo 4 is Nightmare Dungeons, the Helltide Zone events, the Whisperer's bounty system, the open world PvP zones, and they have 3 world bosses that they'll be launching with. Lost Ark, Chaos Dungeons, Guardian Raids, Cube, Trial Path, Tower, Abyssal Dungeons, 16-player raids. There are 20 open world bosses, Chaos Gates, Ghost Ships, Island Adventures, PvP arenas, PvP zones, guild battles, the dailies and weekly system, instance player housing, sailing and islands, the adventure book, and the collectibles. And I don't even think I touched on all of it. And that was kind of what motivated this video. You know, I was seeing the complaints about the beta, and I was looking through and people talking about, oh, it got boring, it got repetitive. Diablo 4, you know, I only played it for a little bit before I felt like I'd done everything and I didn't really have much motivation and there wasn't a lot of different things to do. And I think that's kind of the sticking point for me, where I'm realizing, yes, when you look at the list of varied activities, it's not talking about the amount of content, the amount of hours that you could spend in what there is to do in D4 versus Lost Ark, but the variety on offer, the different ways you approach content, the different types of content to engage in. It is ridiculous. Like, Lost Ark is like 4 or 5 times the amount of varied things to do compared to what we're getting in Diablo 4. But hey, what about other ARPGs? Like I mentioned, Path of Exile is one that's commonly brought up. There's a lot of similarities between that and Diablo 4, besides them being ARPGs. I will admit, it has been some like 8 years before I did anything endgame related in Path of Exile. I did just recently restart playing the game, but a quick search revealed to me that the list of different endgame stuff in Path of Exile include this map system, there are delves, there are heist, there are the league mechanics that come up, there are the master mission daily system, there's Uber Lab, and there is bossing, and I'm sure I am missing much more. Even that feels like a much larger list of variety of offerings compared to what they're talking about launching Diablo 4 with. Now, if you compare Diablo 4 to, say, Diablo 3, yeah, there's more variety, because Diablo 3's endgame was rift runs and bounties. So that's 2 things, but Diablo 4 has five things. You know, this isn't to really crap on Diablo 4 necessarily, because while we are focusing on the variety of endgame content, I do think the width of it is less important than the depth. It does feel like D4 might be a little bit light on endgame content variety. Yes, I think we've made that clear. This isn't to say, though, that it still couldn't eat up lots of time, because yes, I'm sure that running through Nightmare Dungeons, doing the Helltide Zone events, farming those 3 world bosses, by the way, 3 world bosses compared to Lost Ark's 20, like, what is even happening? And then doing the PvP zone and all of this, doing all of this for your gear upgrades and stuff. I'm sure if you want to, when D4 launches, you could easily sink hundreds of hours in. But yeah, it does seem that at least early on, according to the feedback from this endgame beta and everything we know thus far, that I think the bigger potential issue could be the lack of diversity as well as depth, both of them really. Now, the good news is we do know Blizzard already has plans for implementing new content. The first Diablo 4 season will be kicking off shortly after the game releases, and they have said that their intention is to have up to 4 seasons every year, with the promise that these will include new forms of content, challenges, and things to do. At this point, that's just kind of what we're banking on. We are having to take them on their promise that these seasons will be substantial enough. They are, in fact, the whole justification. The live service focus and the seasonal content is the justification for the increase in amount of ways for us to spend money, as we've covered here on the channel ad nauseum. Now, I did see one beta tester leave this comment, which sort of touched on this very topic. They said that their honest opinion from playing the beta is that it's probably going to be pretty fun for the first season or two, but it will need 4 to 5 seasons to get a few changes to the skill tree, to get more Paragon boards, and for them to get more seasons worth of additional content. And that is really what we just have to hope. But yeah, this whole thing did make me realize it's highly likely Diablo 4 launches with a similar issue that most MMOs have when they launch nowadays, and that is that they tend to be light on content at release. Like, you take that comparison to Lost Ark, for example. Lost Ark first launched in 2018, so it had 4 years worth of content and updates to work through when it came to the West. And so this allowed them to not only have a very strong starting package with a ton of content there, but it also accelerated the pace of the post-launch updates, which is a huge advantage. Diablo 4 doesn't have that luxury. It's kind of the same like when any new MMO comes out, they have to compete with WoW and Final Fantasy XIV, ESO, and Guild Wars 2, games that have been live for 5, 10, 15 years or more and have massive heaps of content. All of this is to say, yeah, D4 looks to be launching relatively light on variety, but also depth, and that is my real concern. I'm not saying you need to have 50 different ways to farm endgame gear like Lost Ark does. I don't think that's necessary. It also hasn't traditionally been Diablo's. That's just not been a Diablo thing. Again, D3, you did 2 things. I'm being a little reductive, but still, I don't think it needs to be immensely broad with like 50 different activities that all just play into the same end game loop of resources, currencies, and gear acquisition and powering up of those things. It does feel like it's really, really narrow right now, and it could do with being a bit wider and maybe splitting the difference, because there are so many cool, and this is the thing, I don't need Diablo 4 to be just like Lost Ark for a lot of reasons, especially when it comes to how they handle gearing and the monetization of Lost Ark. No, thank you, D4. You don't need to go in that direction. I definitely do think there's a lot of lessons that could be learned, and if nothing else, I really hope we get at least something more than hard mode dungeons, 3 world bosses, zone events, and open world PvP. I feel like there should be more, and they may very well be, and I think that's the thing that I do want to wrap up saying here, is that even though this endgame beta only had those activities, that doesn't guarantee that that is all of the game it will be launching with. I mean, I guess I would assume if they had more, they would want to test it in their test specifically designed for the end game, but it is also possible, I'm not banking on it, but it is possible that they are saving some things for the launch to keep them a secret, or I can't even say it without no, that's probably not happened, because who cares about keeping, they should test the systems. Yeah, D4 doesn't necessarily need the huge variety of content Lost Ark has, because really, we're gonna play D4 presumably for the gameplay, the challenge, and the loot grind. Those are the main motivators for any good game, for any good ARPG or MMO. But yeah, content variety does help a bit. It helps flesh the game out, it helps it feel more full, and that's one of the things that Lost Ark did very, very well. And with D4 pushing more into this shared world, MMO light elements, making it that kind of a game, I do think that they could do with some more downtime activities, but even more so, I would love to see more structured combat activities. Just pull from that list. Blizzard, just look at what Lost Ark did. Take some of those best ideas and give them the Diablo twist in D4. I think that'd be really really great. Before I wrap up, I do want to talk about today's sponsor again, Ridge Wallet. These are these durable, built to last wallets. I've had mine now for over a year, and it's like all I use. I really have no plan to go back to the old bulky leather wallets that I used to have. Carries everything I need. It's compact, so it takes up less space. It's really nice. Some features include durable materials that they're made out of. They come with a lifetime warranty and a 45-day risk-free trial. They will hold up to 12 cards, as well as having room for cash. It's also made of RFID blocking technology to protect you from digital pickpocketers. They've got over 50,000 5-star reviews on these wallets, and they are offered in over 30 colors and styles. They're holding a special from now until December 22nd. There's a holiday sale going on, and if you head on over to ridge.com/force, you can save up to 40% on your purchase. All in all, yeah, I'm really excited for Diablo 4, but it is a little concerning, the seeming lack of content variety, and I hope that is something that they can address. Or if they don't want to address it, if they just want to stick to 4 or 5 main activities, it does seem clear that they're going to need more depth. And at this point, we're just kind of in a waiting period where we'll see what happens when it launches. And I think probably more importantly, assuming all of this is what the game comes with as a complete package, more importantly, I feel like there's a lot riding on those first couple of seasons. Are they going to deliver, or is it just going to be like, here's a fun seasonal theme and some cool cosmetics? Like, are they actually going to deliver new systems, new things to do when it comes to the end game? We will have to wait and see, but I'm hoping for the best. It's part of the reason I talk about this. I hope they've got stuff planned. And yeah, I hope the game turns out well. That does it for me today. Thank you as always for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy.